For those that have not yet met me, my name's Siobhan O'Sullivan. I'm a consultant for the Future Skills organisation, particularly working with them to help upskill educators on AI as part of our Skills Accelerator program. And Tanya, my colleague, is also on the call. So thanks for joining us. We're doing these Lunch and Learn webinars every month on a particular sector. And today, of course, we're talking about technology. And we're very lucky to have Mark Pedersen here with us, Dr. Mark Pedersen. So just another minute or so and we'll get started. Max Wilson, nice to see you on camera. Thanks for joining. Al Safi Mohammed, nice to see you too. I don't know what that symbol is. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming on the camera.
Nice to see you. Thank you very much.
And Rolly, is that how I pronounce your name? Emmett? Yeah, nice. Is that German name or nationality is Rolly?
British.
British, okay, wow. I've never met or seen a Rolly before. Thank you. That's cool.
Well, Rolly's one of a kind. So good to see you, mate.
Thanks, well, he's definitely one of a kind. Excellent. Thanks for coming online. And Vikram Magla, nice to see you on camera. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Nicola Curtin, nice to see you on the call. Mark Cohen, nice to see you as well. Thanks for coming back on. Nice to see you here every month. And Jamie Weston, nice to see you as well.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Srija here.
Excellent. And Richard Barrett, thanks for joining the call as well. Okay, look, let's get started. My screen is up anyway for everyone to see. As we mentioned, AI in practice technology. So today, just to scroll through, I would like to start initially by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands in which we're calling in from, acknowledging this is a webinar and we're calling in from everywhere. I'm actually based in Sydney, so I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians on the lands in which I'm joining you from, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Feel free to put into the chat the traditional custodians on the lands in which you're calling from if you'd like to do so. The schedule for today. So obviously I'm the host for today's call from the Future Skills Organisation, but most importantly, we're here to listen to Dr. Mark Pedersen. He will do a short introduction on ACS, and then he will do, as per the normal schedule for these webinars in relation to AI in practice, review of the impact of the artificial intelligence on the skills and workforce in technology. And then also some relevant examples of AI that technologists are using or that we see being deployed within technology, and of course some time for Q&A at the end. So as I mentioned, Dr. Mark Pedersen is the CTO at KJR. So I'll let him start sharing his screen and I will just do an intro in relation to Mark. Now, full disclosure, I used to work at ACS, so I have had the pleasure of meeting before. But as I mentioned, Dr. Mark Pedersen is the CTO at KJR, Australia's leading digital transformation risk consultancy. And Mark started his IT career in Software Verification Research Centre and joined KJR in 1998. So been with the business for a long time. Mark has been involved in testing a variety of financial and mission critical software systems, as well as developing and delivering a wide range of professional training courses for the software quality industry, chairing leading industry conferences and forums and outside of business hours, pushing the boundaries of interactive digital culture and art. Hopefully at the end we might have a bit of a comment on that, Mark. I'm keen to learn more. As a CTO of KJR, Mark works closely with both technical and business stakeholders in order to deliver the best emerging software quality and risk management, risk mitigation techniques in a practical business environment with a particular interest in agile and adaptive approaches. Mark is based in Melbourne, and I understand you are frequently spotted in airports across the country, Mark, and he can usually be found in the midst of fellow digital creatives and with an espresso in hand. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. And, look, I should update that bio because I'm really, much more into filter coffee than espressos these days, if I can find it. But yeah, look, it's a pleasure to be here, and also really want to be wearing my ACS hat. So obviously the ACS is a really important partner with the FSO around these sorts of events. And if you're not already aware, then the Australian Computer Society is the premier professional association for the ICT sector in Australia, and we represent over 40,000 tech professionals and sort of really the assessing authority for skilled migration, university curriculum, and act as an instrument of feedback from the ICT sector to government at every level. So I've been a member of the ACS for a long time, and these days sit on the AI in Society Committee, sort of renamed from the AI Ethics Committee. So yeah, it's one of the key questions that the committee's been actually grappling with is technology skills in the age of AI. So it was a really good opportunity to participate in this event. So I might just, I think, dive straight in because there's lots to cover. So, by all means, throw in questions, but if you aren't sort of throwing in questions, then yeah, maybe be on mute. So yeah, let's dive in and see what there is to explore. So I would say, as a way of framing our conversation, that despite the fact that we talk about doing software engineering, for the most part in the ICT sector, we haven't really been doing that much engineering. We've created a workforce of craftspeople who build things by hand. So here we've got an image of a bunch of people making spoke shaves for, wooden wheels for carts. And we've been doing much the same sort of thing. We run trade schools where we teach people, how to make a wheel or how to make the tools to make wheels. And the first few years of anyone's career in tech is usually some sort of, I would say, even just an informal apprenticeship. But that's really rapidly changing. So a lot of that change is already visible, and I'm kind of collapsing the two different sections in the agenda into the one sort of thing. So we're probably going to talk a little bit more about AI use cases up front and then talking to the impact on skills. But even before we talk about AI, we can already reflect upon some of the automation that has been affecting tech roles. So if we just pick one example, we think about folks who used to, manage server deployments and network configurations and so forth. That kind of ClickOps style of work, that's really shifted almost completely to infrastructure as code with lots of automation instead of any of that being done by hand. And that process was definitely accelerated by the move into the cloud. But it still took a while for that to take effect. Now, as we've been starting to leverage large language models to do a lot more automation in this kind of knowledge workspace, the pace of change has changed significantly. So, obviously everyone hears a lot about, sort of tech layoffs at the moment. I wouldn't say that all of them are actually attributable to AI, but definitely there's a change in how we're doing software development. I myself do this a lot. So legacy code comprehension, using LLMs to understand, hey, we've all got tech debt. No one really knows how that, 20-year-old system actually works. So you can very effectively use LLMs to help you understand a legacy code base, generate missing documentation, make sure that things are up to date. And that has a big impact on the maintainability of those systems. And sort of by a similar extension, if you're generating code, even if you are doing it by hand, then there's no excuse to not have good documentation around that code these days. But obviously the big shift has been around moving to code generation. So, everyone is, either a skilled practitioner and leveraging these tools to generate code more effectively, or just, vibe coding solutions, out of hours over the weekends. So we're seeing a lot of movement in that space, and I'll say a little more about that as we go along. I'm getting a little bit of background noise from someone, so maybe just check if you're on mute. But another big area that not everyone who's working in tech is writing code, right? So a lot of us are doing lots of other kind of document wrangling. Siobhan and I were already talking about the number of meeting note takers that turn up these days. So obviously there's lots of use of meeting summaries, and I am finding that in itself is changing a lot of knowledge capture. I'll do a Teams meeting, record it, and then that becomes documentation as part of knowledge transfer for other members of my team. But if I'm generating reports, definitely these sorts of tools are useful for drafting reports, for generating critique, to improve things, for doing research. So I think everyone would be familiar with that aspect. But probably digging a little bit deeper is, what the capability to do things like semantic queries of data lakes, generating reports, so that business users are no longer as dependent upon, say, the data science team to generate a specific report. That stuff can be pulled together, and the role of those sort of data science teams is often now increasingly about how do you enable that kind of agentic AI mediated question answering and provide confidence. So we're going to say a little bit more about that as we go along. The other aspect, I guess, working a lot in quality assurance is things like synthetic data generation. So, the days of depending entirely upon production data for test environments and things like that are rapidly fading away. That kind of data carries so much security risk that, synthetic data generation is a really key application of some of these sorts of things that we can do with generative AI. Obviously, workflow automation. Again, I'm a QA guy at heart, so test case generation is a big part of what we can do with these tools. There, again, should be no excuse for not having good unit test coverage and other sorts of end-to-end test coverage if you're using these tools as part of software development. But more broadly, things like business process automation, again, that kind of help desk IT infrastructure automation is becoming increasingly agentic. So call centers, help desk tickets, those sorts of things are delivering a lot of value. And it's not just about replacing jobs in those areas. If you've got a call center and 70% of your calls don't get answered, then being able to answer those questions agentically really helps. The sort of bottleneck that an IT help desk might be in a business, that kind of thing can be significantly relieved. So all of those are kind of use cases that are happening now. If they're not part of your own existing experience or workflow, I'd really encourage people to dive in and explore some of those things. They can be very transformative. But what I want to lead us into is really talking a little bit more about how across all of those use cases, agentic systems that plan and execute multi-step work are changing these sorts of interactions yet again. So we're seeing a fairly rapid change in the way that AI is impacting tech roles and tech skills. And it is akin to that shift from work that's done as craftspeople to more of the factory model. So people are already talking about, lights off code factories where no human is actually touching any of the code base. So what, is that the future? What does that really look like, and what does it mean for us, particularly in terms of our tech skills? So if we think about that kind of industry revolution and industrialization of processes, then we can think about Frederick Winslow Taylor, who was working in the sort of steel manufacturing in the late 1800s in the US, and really pioneered a lot of the idea of sort of scientific management, sort of time and motion studies, really defining the process and the workflow, and defining the task. And I think, his concept was that, hey, if we have these well-defined tasks and there's a collaboration between management and the workforce, then we solve the problem together efficiently and make it more repeatable. Unfortunately, Taylorism sort of became very much if you like, humans are replaceable components within the factory system, and didn't always produce the sort of great outcomes that maybe he imagined. And I think it's very tempting to look at sort of the agentification of software development and sort of technology roles in general could go down a kind of Taylorist path, where maybe humans are just a component in the overall system, rather than using agentic AI to actually enhance our capability and increase our agency. So, are we using these sorts of systems to actually improve the work that we do, or are we using these sorts of systems to intensify, sort of surveillance? Are we actually measuring business value, or are we just looking for more output volume, regardless of whether that's quality? Are we actually increasing human capability or removing sort of human agency? So there's lots of questions that come up. And I think I want to use this opportunity to sort of get us thinking about what kind of path we want to take with the use of AI, and what kind of skills we really need to get good value out of this kind of technology. So if we think of AI as a capability multiplier, we've been doing this sort of thing for a long time, from calculators all the way through now to agentic AI. And obviously we're automating some of the artifact production. I was talking about that already, but it doesn't really automate away our accountability. Large language models in particular have gotten sort of cheaper, there's lots of improvement, but we're probably seeing at the moment what was being given away now being sort of like more correctly costed. So you can see that the token economy is really blowing up. Lots of people would have seen stories about Amazon and Uber burning through their sort of AI token budget, perhaps excessively. So that's a real consideration around what kind of value are we actually getting out of using these tools, and what's the real cost. But I think even apart from the economics, the deeper question that comes up is around how do we have confidence in these processes, and how do we actually ensure that we're getting good value? There's been a number of studies into, say, agentic software development. Even last year, there were, sort of the METR study into measuring the impact of AI adoption in software development, indicated that people thought they were, 20% faster, but they were actually 20% slower at delivering code, working code, that is. And so there was a big gap there between perception and actual productivity. METR has actually updated that study as of earlier this year. And I think people have, it indicates that people have been learning what are the right kinds of tasks to hand over to an agent, and people are getting smarter about where that delivers real value and where you end up just having to review lots of code that looks great but actually has subtle faults in it. But yeah, there's lots of indications of places where if you just bolt in an agent to an existing human workflow, it doesn't really produce business value. Probably a lot of us have got colleagues that, look really productive. They produced, 10-page reports in the last 2 days, but now someone else has to review them. The junior coder that's vibe coded their way through a whole bunch of stuff that now a senior developer has to spend their time reviewing. So those sorts of things don't necessarily produce actual business benefit. You're just producing a lot more content. So if we think about where effort actually has to shift, then human effort is moving upstream and downstream. We need to focus more on business alignment. What's the actual outcome that we want? What's the context that needs to go into that process? Systems thinking around what's the agentic process that we want to run and how do we control it, refine it, and govern sort of risk and quality. So you can see by looking at those things that tech roles that might have been once very handcraft, writing the code, generating the report, become more managerial. We're defining the goals, we're defining the process, we're measuring how well that process is running. So a lot of our future capability has got to be around equipping people to do that well and do it in a meaningful way. So a lot of that comes down to, are we good at writing requirements? Are we good at designing those good processes? Are we good at governing those processes? So if we think about what makes up an agent, it's less and less important which model we're actually using. And it's more about how we're embedding that, if we're talking about large language models, into the knowledge work process that we're running. So, setting up some guides. What does good actually look like? Setting acceptance criteria, setting up templates, providing the right context, enabling tool use. So that's probably one of the key areas that I've found, I've put a lot of effort into getting an agent, not just talking back to me about stuff, but, picking up the right tool and using it appropriately, and hopefully not just rewriting, I'll write another Python script to do this. No, there's already one there, just use it. So getting those sort of workflows working are really important, but then setting up sensors, setting up the tests and other kind of metrics to be able to assess automatically, is this process producing acceptable results? So when I've been, say, using AI to test other AI systems, I might be running thousands of tests. I can't actually read the results of all those thousands of tests. I'm relying on sensors to help me zero in on the exceptions. What are the results that actually need human investigation? So then being able to steer that loop is important. So these are the kind of skills, this is the kind of model that's emerging. It will continue to change, but I think within this sort of harness framework, there's always going to be pieces that humans need to own as part of our accountability. So, we're always going to need to be defining what are the requirements, what do we actually expect as the result of this? What is the value that we're trying to create? What are the risks? That's a job for us to assess. Having agents that then generate output or interact with tools based on those requirements is part of the flow. Potentially having a second agent that then verifies those outputs. Within my own team, people who've used some of these agentic workflows have found that those, left to their own devices, an agent will rewrite the tests that you've been setting up so that those tests pass, or it'll just comment stuff out in order to get everything green. So often what you need to do is separate the evaluation from the agent itself in order to properly monitor things. And so it's still always going to be up to us to really look at, are we getting business value? Is that the right output? Is that the performance improvement that we're looking for? And if things fail, how are we handling those failures? And part of the shift for lots of people is about going back and thinking about that systematically rather than just, oh, I'll just prompt again to do a quick fix in that spot. And I feel that temptation myself. It always feels like more work to go back and try and fix the process than to just, ask my agent to do a little bit more work or do a bit better. So, I think one way of thinking about this is that as we shift into this more AI-enabled way of doing technology, whether that's software development, infrastructure management, other kinds of knowledge work, it's less about who can just generate outputs, and it's more about who can generate outputs that can be trusted. So I'm going to, sort of keep pressing on here to try and stick to time. But the way I think about these things is that, we've been doing stuff very manually. Now, as we move into AI assisted, a lot of the effort and the training that we've been talking about is like, oh, how do you use AI effectively? Is that about having good prompting skills? You're sort of relying on guardrails that are maybe built into a model. As we move into agentic, then that's going to be more about governing whole systems of AI agents. And there's much more focus on how do we engineer and steer those harnesses so that they work well. And so that is the shift from doing to directing. And again, I'm not going to sort of read out everything that's on these slides. We'll share the details with people to mull over. But I think one of the key things is that as we get these processes working, how do we manage exceptions? How do we actually manage the handoff between an agent and a human? How do we set up trusted fail-safe mechanisms? Lots of safety engineering thinking comes into this sort of process. And I think that's going to affect knowledge work a lot more as we go forward. So the sorts of things that are in scope now, and they will continue to expand, is that, hey, you can use tools like ArcKit. If you haven't checked that out, if you work in systems architecture, go and have a look at it. You can build entire, software transformation business cases, high-level architecture diagrams, high-level project plans. Claude Code will go and build all of that stuff for you just by pulling down a GitHub repo. But it's up to you to still provide the right context and evaluate whether that's producing a useful output. You could use SpecKit to then turn that, project plan into some working code. Again, is that going to deliver real value? There's harnesses there, but someone has to pilot them. Other examples that I'm not going to go into lots of detail, but, transforming legacy code into modern code, bug fixes being automatically driven through to, pull requests in your GitHub code base. Those sorts of things are very harnessable. Areas where things are underspecified, where there's tacit knowledge, where there's negotiation between different teams, where we've got long horizon planning, humans need to be involved. So what is harnessable is going to keep changing, but it's key that, we as pilots of an agentic workforce, if we're working in these sort of tech roles, that's likely to be the way that we work. We've got to be asking these sorts of questions. What assumptions are being made? What could go wrong? Where's the evidence? How would we know if this process is failing, and being able to put that in there. So those sorts of capabilities are going to be key. The ability to, write requirements. So if you're thinking about learning objectives, if someone's, studying in this world of agentic AI, can you write a good brief that maybe an agent can follow? Can you design a repeatable pipeline? Can you decide whether something should be automated or not? And how do you manage risk and failover? So again, I'm not going to go through this sort of like detailed slide. I'll leave that for people to sort of reflect on. But I think there's lots of ways that we can map those different kinds of capabilities into specific sort of skill sets that are very human, about understanding how AI works, but then how we communicate, how we assess risk, how we think through these sorts of processes and how we adapt to changing circumstances. These are the sort of skill sets that we need, more so than understanding specifically how a particular tool works. So, you know, that kind of guidelines around maintainability, good architecture, those sorts of things are really key. We can, you know, automate checks for whether expected behavior is there in that system, but it's always going to be up to us to recognize whether there's actual business value being delivered. So those are the sorts of things that I think we need to be focusing on. So if we drill down into a conclusion around what does this mean for skills in the tech sector, if you think about a lot of our current curriculum focus, we focus on teaching people how to write code, how to configure systems, how to follow a particular, you know, agile methodology or project planning methodology, how to do tests, how to actually use a particular platform. What we need to be focusing on is a lot more around how do we run these processes, how do we define constraints, contexts, decide whether something should be automated, design a good automation harness and process. So those are the sorts of things that I think will be shifting much more towards, you know, teaching people to decompose work, teach sensor acceptance design, etc. So to wrap up, if you're in education, look at one of your technical courses and ask, where do learners practice defining the work, not just doing the work? If you're in industry, look at one of your technical workflows, look at the processes that run that your teams use to run that. Could that be agentified? And how would that work in with your existing team? Your existing team's qualifications, where do they learn and practice good requirements, you know, verifying processes, managing risk and governance? And if you're a learner or if you're working in the industry, how do you build up evidence that you can actually use these tools responsibly? So I know that was a big download. Happy to take questions, and yeah, see what else we can fit into the time.
Thanks, Mark. A great presentation, and I think several things for us to reflect on and consider. The question option has been opened up, so please definitely drop any comments into the chat feature. Just in that, I do have one already. Let me just go into that in a moment. My page is just loading, excuse me. Okay, from Vanessa McCarthy. So Mark, Vanessa shared that she loved your comments about what we are really trying to do. Do you see ACS as a responsible body for how to get the most out of these features and characteristics, and how analysis of this new data production can be achieved?
Look, it's we were talking about this in the AI in Society committee meeting just a couple of weeks ago. It's really challenging, right? Because the ACS is the body that accredits university curriculum in the ICT sector. So the ACS definitely has a role to play in shaping how we get the most out of these kind of tools. At the same time, it's really, really hard to change curriculum. That's a slow process. So, you know, I think one of the things that we're grappling with within the ACS, we don't want to compete with training providers, but how do we enable the industry to actually respond quickly to some of the changes that are taking place? Because it's non-trivial for universities to change their curriculum.
Yeah, no, definitely. Mark, perhaps your thoughts on this question. Felicity Morris has asked, out of curiosity, has anyone fired or replaced agents? Curious about how others have done this.
Oh, look, you know, just the other day.
I was going to say, is it as simple as just not paying your subscription or cancelling your subscription? Is that equivalent to firing?
Yeah, look, you know, I think there's lots and lots of comments about people, you know, turning on Copilot and then a few months later turning it off. And often that has to do with maybe not having really well-defined business use cases. I think that there is a lot of organizations right now that are going, no, we're capping your, agent use because you just spent $500 million without us planning for that. I was talking to someone the other day. They're trying to agentify their workforce in terms of software development. They've got a budget of $100,000 for the year, but they think they would probably need $1 million. That's a non-trivial shift in budget. So there's real questions to be asked around that. I mean, I was using an agent the other day actually to help me prepare some of these slides, and discovered that it doesn't play that well if you go and change slides while it's doing stuff, because it will undo the changes that you've done manually. So I was ready to fire it at that point.
Well, that's good feedback, and I think we're evolving or working through those nuances with different AI solutions, and also that inequity even within an organisation. Some people have access to full freight access of, say, Copilot, as you referenced, and others not. Question from Luca Phillips: there has been a lot of noise on AI eliminating the entry-level tech roles from the market. Michael, what's your take on that point, and is that just noise?
Look, I think there's. I don't want to say it's just noise. I do think that there is a level of sort of AI smoke screening going on, where people have overhired and they're using AI as a reason, to offload. But there's also, I think there's a Gartner prediction at the moment that says that 40% of organisations that have fired graduates will be rehiring them within 12 months.
See how we go.
I think that it's about understanding how you use these tools well and where you use them. That it's not about just replacing people.
I read an article from an international newsletter this morning that talked about the idea of the commentary in the press around we've made these people redundant because of AI is actually not because AI is already replacing their role. It's because of the future investment required to deploy AI that they're trying to make funds for in the P&L. So interesting, or the budget, I should say. Andrew Mayer, or Ma, my apologies, Andrew, if I've mispronounced your surname, it stated there is a shift unfolding with how software is being built. Vibe coding allows users to quickly prototype and show IT what they want instead of telling very ambiguous requirements. Developers are good at, for building quality and task completion, but the premium skills will be architecting for cost-effective scale and reliability. What are your thoughts on that?
Couldn't agree more. Like, I think that is the real shift. So I think that, for a long time as an industry, we've accepted, and there's no disrespect to any, business analysts, but we've accepted lots of poor requirements and relied on developers to do a sort of interpretation of those requirements and produce something that works. I think the ability to quickly spin up a working demo and says, yeah, this is what I want, that is a real game changer. But yeah, completely agree. I've more than once had to caution organizations. They're like, oh, we'll just get an agency to vibe code our enterprise UI. I'm like, don't do that. It's good for getting a demo, but it's not going to scale. It's not going to be resilient or maintainable. So the shift into that kind of good architecture practice, I think that's where, the whole industry needs to be shifting. And it's tricky because it's hard to be a junior and be good at architecture, because often you need to make mistakes in order to understand what good architecture looks like.
Another question from Vanessa: have we lost patience in the time and effort for human skill uptake?
Oh, look, I mean, I think we live in an age of short attention spans. We've done that to ourselves. And probably those of us in the tech sector are, suffer from lots of context switching. So I think the ability to stop and slow down and think deeply we need to be better at creating the conditions for that and rewarding that. I think that is a real challenge.
The other one, we know AI can go rogue, e.g. Pocket OS. What oversight do we need as AI is being rapidly developed?
Look, I think that's one of the reasons why, I focused this talk a lot on this kind of technical aspect of harness engineering. I mean, I work in AI assurance, right? So my whole thing is this is where we put human effort, is wrapping the guardrails and the governance around things. Don't just give your agent like the God keys to, your entire platform. All of that sort of good practice about sort of, lowest possible permissions, those sorts of things to get the job done. That's the stuff that we need to be focusing on, and making sure that things don't escalate out of control. So a good harness is going to be part of the solution there.
Right. Mohammed's asked, how do you deal with the hallucination element within AI with the work you're doing?
So I think that's a real issue. A lot of it is around context engineering. I've was recently been doing some work on testing like a chatbot that is tasked with answering questions about workplace health and safety. So that is fairly mission critical. We did a lot of testing to make sure that it wasn't answering questions from its learnt knowledge, but only answering questions from approved document sources. So there's things like that you need to be, again, adding the harness to check for context correctness, and groundedness of those sorts of things. And there's probably a whole other topic that we could go into around sort of context engineering from that point of view. But a harness is really key.
Yeah, great. I've just put up the marking, shall we say, the rating for today's webinar. So feel free, if you have a moment, just to scan the QR code, and please do give us your feedback. We will continue with the questions, though, because we've got a couple of good ones here. So Mark, can you predict the future skills profile? It sounds like we expected developers to expand their skills, encompassing requirements capture, software engineering skills, and the ability to critique and evaluate the solution. Plus some need the ability to develop skills and rules for the agent. What are your thoughts on the future requirements?
Look, I mean, I think the thing is that we're not going to go hunting unicorns, right? So we're still going to need a team of people who have those different strengths. I think that the shift for lots of developers will be to expand their skills further into what does good architecture look like, what does maintainable code, and what are the principles that you might have been following innately, but now you need to sort of like pass on to an agent. But there could be other members of the team that are really leaning in to help with the business validation process. I think the role of like the BA, the role of the quality engineer, the role of the developer, all of these roles are going to transform to be more focused on processes and systems rather than producing individual artifacts. So that's probably the key shift that I see. But
Excellent.
there probably still will be people with those roles, so to speak.
I'll try and get, if you can hold on a bit longer, everybody will get through a few more questions. These are great. So Felicity Morris, just jumping to her question because it builds on Rolly's, which is basically what are the non-technical skills profile for leaders of teams in the future, do you think?
So I think, outside of the tech role, then a lot of this has got to be, literacy for business executives and leaders who have an understanding of what's worth agentifying. How can we actually, not just do AI for AI's sake, but something that's actually going to distribute real business benefit and real community benefit, social benefit, not just maximize profit at the other people's expense. And then managing I think someone mentioned sort of, good FinOps, like managing those costs. So how you actually focus on that. I think, all of the investment that goes into building gigantic models we could be directing lots of effort into smaller, more efficient models that do small tasks well, rather than throwing giant, really expensive models at, trivial tasks. So I think that there's a lot of economics that we need to be focusing on as well.
Excellent. An educator-based question from Andrew Brown. So not sure we've spoken about it, but how do you build AI into learning, but ensuring that it is not leaned upon by the learner from the educational institution perspective?
Look, I think that's going to keep changing. It's pretty tricky, but I was hinting at this earlier. How important is it to say, oh, we're marking you down because you used an agent to help you write this code or write this essay, versus rewarding someone for actually building a good process that produced reliable code or an accurate report, and they correctly assessed the risks around the agent hallucinating, or they correctly managed the contexts so that the agent produced something useful. I think that's part of the shift, as we shift away from teaching people to produce artifacts to helping them really understand how to produce a reliable process. Reward them for that.
Excellent. Luke Dooley has asked, with AI and technology constantly changing and evolving, what would you advise school leavers, graduates to focus on to stay relevant or even to get ahead?
Look, systems thinking, critical thinking, learning how to learn, all the stuff I'm talking about, half of the things that were in last month's harnesses have already been absorbed into this month's frontier coding model. So, part of it is about understanding and valuing what it means to be a human in society, and understand where, as a technologist, you can deliver value. Focusing on those things and cultivating those skills and that ability to learn, I think, is more important than learning a tool.
Yeah, okay. And Vanessa, I think final comment, perhaps a question. Do digital engineers just not like vibe coding because it's removing work opportunities for them? Provocative statement. Surely it helps them deal with the planning parts. Wouldn't it be better to skill those who are vibe coders in the fundamentals?
Oh, look, absolutely. I think, the more that we can help people who are, once upon a time writing requirements, now they're kind of generating a prototype by vibe coding it. The more they can understand what's actually going on within that process, probably the better that prototype is going to be. I totally understand and respect engineers who are like, I don't want to inherit your AI slop code that I now have to fix up and maintain. So, we need to have that sort of process of handoff to go, okay, I understand what you want. Here's how it could be built so it's maintainable and scalable. Those sorts of principles are pretty key.
Well, that does bring our Lunch and Learn today to a close. Thank you, Mark, for doing rapid fire questions at the end as well, and for a fabulous presentation. I would like to encourage everyone just to give a reaction to Mark with your react button. Great to have you on the call. I'm obviously hoping that you're willing to have everyone connect with you on LinkedIn, Mark, so expect a few connections on LinkedIn, and great to have you on the call today. Thanks everybody for joining, and look forward to seeing you on our next Lunch and Learn.